The first two had gone down whole, legs twitching, bitter and warm, but the third cockroach clawed his throat as if it knew what he'd done. They made him eat 7. One for each night Emily was missing. Silas Ward, once a proud Navy surgeon, now sat chained to the filth-slick floor of Santa Clara's old meat cellar, punished not by law, but by silence. The girl had vanished inside the governor's fortress. Everyone knew who was behind it. Captain Dorian Salt, a corsair with a royal license and a serpent's tongue. No one dared accuse him, so Silas did, and for that they called him mad. They dragged him behind the tavern, laughed as he crawled, and fed him what only rats should eat. But the worst part wasn't the taste. It was knowing Emily might still be out there, calling for a father who was too late. This isn't just a pirate story. It's a curse passed from mouth to mouth, buried beneath the screams of men who tried to forget. Blackbeard's voice haunts these pages. The sea punishes, but men destroy. Welcome to the channel The Pirate's Diary. If tales of pirates, lost oaths, and cursed gold stir something in you, the sea keeps its stories, but only for those who dare to remember. Will you join the crew? Subscribe and step aboard. The sound came first, boots on wet stones, slow and cruel, like someone dragging the past behind them. Silas Ward looked up from his corner of the dock, breath caught in his throat. He knew that rhythm. Fear had a sound, and it walked like Dorian's salt. Mist rolled in from the bay, thick as smoke from burnt ships. The lanterns barely held the night back, their flames twitching like nervous fingers. Behind Dorian came 2 shadows, men with powder-burned skin and smiles that had forgotten how to be human. Their belts jingled with coins, still warm from the pockets of dead men. But it wasn't gold that brought Dorian back to Santa Clara. It was another child. Not Emily, not this time. Now it was Rosa, the daughter of Esmeralda, the mute sailmaker, the woman who had sewn white canvas for the Navy and buried 3 sons in unmarked graves. She never spoke a word, but her eyes screamed every time the wind carried a ship's bell into town. Silas clenched his jaw, not from fear, not anymore, from memory. His hand brushed the inside of his coat. The scalpel was still there, rusted, dull, but loyal. It had opened men in the name of medicine, and once in the name of revenge. He had sworn never again, never cut for rage, never carve for sorrow. But then a voice rose from behind him, deep, raw, older than hate. "You still bleed inside, Ward." Silas froze. His heart didn't race. It stopped. There he was, Blackbeard, standing where no ship had docked, where no wind had howled, as if the sea had coughed him up like something it couldn't keep down. No crew, no banner, just him, a shadow in a coat stitched from storms, eyes that had seen too much and refused to look away. His beard matted with salt and secrets. The kind of man who didn't ask to enter a place. He was the place. Silas opened his mouth, but no words came. Blackbeard stepped forward, his boots silent now, heavier than anchors. "How many more, Doctor?" he asked, voice soft as breaking ribs. "How many more girls before you cut through your silence?" The question wasn't cruel. It was a mirror. Silas felt his knees crack. He hadn't wept in years, not since the night Emily vanished into the governor's stone house and the town pretended not to hear the screams. But now his eyes burned. He tasted copper. Memory, anger, guilt, they all came back with the tide. In his mind, he saw Emily's small hand slipping from his as the guards pulled him back. He saw the blood on the dress. He saw nothing done, and now it was happening again. Silas looked at the scalpel, a useless piece of iron, a promise broken more times than he could count. He whispered, "This blade used to heal." Blackbeard nodded. "Then make it remember." The storm hit then, as if the sea itself wanted to scream. Waves slammed the docks, the bells howled across the harbor, and in the chaos, Silas moved, not toward Dorian, toward the house where Rosa had been taken, toward the silence that had lasted too long. Every step was a scream without sound, every breath a prayer that the girl was still alive. Behind him, Blackbeard watched, unmoving, unreadable. Some say he disappeared again, like a gust between the sails. Others swear he followed Ward into the dark, whispering names of the damned as the doctor carved his way through the sins of Santa Clara. "I bled for justice," Silas would write years later, "but that night I made the wound smile." The candlelight trembled, not from the wind, there was none, but from something colder, older. Silas Ward stood motionless in the back room of the tavern, spine rigid, jaw locked. The air stank of sweat, salt, and moldy wood. But beneath it all, something else. A scent he hadn't smelled in years. Betrayal. Blackbeard didn't come for gold. He came for something heavier. A debt that stank of rot and silence. The door hadn't opened. No one had seen him enter. But there he was, a shadow in the corner of the room, soaked in shipwrecks and stormlight. His eyes were not cruel, but ancient, as if they'd seen every man make the same mistake. His voice cut through the dim. "If the executioner sleeps while the condemned still breathes, is he not part of the crime?" Silas said nothing. He couldn't. His bull. Hands, once steady as a surgeon's oath, trembled by his sides. He wanted to look away. He didn't. Blackbeard stepped forward. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply placed an old leather sack on the table, the kind used to hold powder or bones. It moved. The room fell silent, save for the sound, the faint scratching sound of something alive. Blackbeard untied the cord, slowly, deliberately. He opened the bag. Inside they squirmed, cockroaches, dozens, bloated from the damp of a dungeon. Legs twitching, antennas flicking, alive and hungry. Silas blinked hard. A dry breath escaped his throat. The memories returned without mercy. La Española, the smell of rusted chains, the screams behind walls that bled, and the punishment reserved for the worst of traitors. Not a whip, not a blade, but a mouthful of insects, forced down while the guards laughed, each bite a reminder, "You betrayed your own." Blackbeard tilted his head, eyes locked on Silas. "Do you remember what they did to traitors?" Silas didn't answer. He didn't have to. His eyes were already closed, and in the dark behind his eyelids, it all came back. Emily's voice, the silence that followed, the deal he made with Dorian Salt in a drunken haze of grief and rage, the price he paid, and the one he didn't. He had been a surgeon, a man of duty, but on that island he had become something else, not a pirate, not a healer, just a coward, one who watched and waited while others burned. Blackbeard didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence filled the room like rising smoke, thick, unspoken, choking. Silas opened his eyes again and whispered, "I tried to forget." Blackbeard's voice, low as the undertow, "The sea remembers, even when you don't." A single roach fell from the sack onto the table. It crawled toward the edge, legs scraping the wood like tiny claws. Silas reached for his knife, not to kill it, but to steady himself. The blade was clean, his hands were not. He thought of Esmeralda's daughter, of the men walking free while ghosts whispered behind every locked door in Santa Clara. He thought of the silence he had chosen, and the one Blackbeard had just broken. Outside, the tide pulled hard against the pier. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but it would. And this time, it wouldn't be the town that paid. It would be him. Because some debts aren't paid in coin. They're swallowed. Alive. And Blackbeard, he was just the reminder that the past never sinks. It waits. The Square of Santa Clara was silent, too silent. The bells had been tied with rags, the doors barred, and the mothers, they hid with their daughters, holding them as if the wind itself might snatch them away. Justice wasn't coming on horseback. It came on foot, with no badge, no trial, only memory, and a blade. Silas Ward crossed the square like a ghost who'd waited too long. In his coat, the scalpel lay cold against his ribs, but it no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like a verdict. At the tavern's entrance, a lantern flickered in the dark, and beside it stood Blackbeard, not as a captain, not as a legend, but as a man carrying the weight of too many sins. His voice was low, hollow, shaking with something deeper than anger. Tonight, there is no court. Tonight, there is man's justice. He held out the lantern. Silas took it and stepped inside. The tavern smelled of sweat, stale beer, and lies. Laughter spilled from the far end, sharp and careless like broken glass. At the corner table, where pirates once whispered secrets over stolen gold, Dorian Salt was laughing, drunk, comfortable, whole, as if time hadn't touched him, as if no girl had ever screamed behind locked doors. Silas walked forward. No fear, no hesitation, only weight in his steps, like chains dragging behind him. He stopped at the edge of Dorian's table. Their eyes met. Silas asked calmly, "Do you remember my daughter?" The silence hit like a musket shot. The laughter died. The room grew colder. Dorian blinked. His hand reached slowly for the knife at his belt, out of habit, not courage. Silas didn't move. He leaned in, voice steady. "There are things you swallow in this life, Dorian. Tonight, it's your turn." A shadow stirred near the door. Blackbeard stepped forward, face half lit by the lantern's dying flame. In his hand, a ceramic bowl sealed with black cloth. He placed it on the table, pulled the cloth back. Inside, they writhed. Cockroaches, dozens, alive, wet, ravenous. Their legs scratched the bowl like fingernails against bone. The smell was sickly, rot and cellar damp. They moved as one, like a dark living mass. Dorian went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. Just breath, just fear. He looked at Blackbeard, at Silas, at the bowl. And somewhere in that triangle of silence, he understood. This wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering, about making him taste what he had made others live. Dorian pushed back his chair, but Blackbeard's boot landed on the edge of it, pinning him to the floor. "You fed on girls like her," Silas said, voice hollow. "Tonight you eat for her." One of the roaches crawled up the rim of the bowl, antenna twitching. Another followed. Dorian flinched. The tavern held its breath. What came next, no one would forget. Not the screams, not the gagging, not the moment when Dorian tried to flee, only to find every face turned away, even the ones who once shared his drink. The offering had been made. Justice wasn't clean. It never was. But for once, in that cursed port, a ghost found rest, and Blackbeard disappeared with the morning fog. Some say the bowl still sits beneath the tavern floorboards. Others say it was shattered, and something inside still crawls at night. But all agree on this. Vengeance may be bitter, but guilt eats slower. The tavern had never been so quiet. Not even during storms, not even when the noose was tied too tight around a neck. Not even when Emily vanished. Now it was as if the walls themselves held their breath. Dorian Salt was pale. His mouth twisted with rage, but it was fear that trembled behind his eyes. He kicked his chair back, trying to rise. "You're mad, Ward! This is a farce!" he shouted, voice cracking with panic. But before he could take a step, Blackbeard's hand crashed onto his shoulder, pushing him down with the weight of every ghost that haunted the Caribbean. "This is not madness," Blackbeard said, eyes like stormlight through fog. "This is memory, and tonight you will swallow yours." No one moved. Not the barkeep, not the men at the back, whose hands gripped mugs but didn't drink, not even the rats in the cellar. Silas Ward stood in front of Dorian, holding the bowl, ceramic, heavy, still warm with breath. He brought it close to the traitor's face. The stench hit first, rot, bile, wet stone, then the movement, a writhing black tide, legs, shells, biting silence, cockroaches, alive, dozens, possibly more. "This is your banquet," Silas whispered, voice steady like a blade before the cut. "Each bite a debt, each twitching leg a voice you silenced." Dorian gasped, his body trembling, sweat pouring down his neck like melting wax. He looked around for help, found only turned faces and lowered eyes. No one would save him. No one had saved them. "I can't," he breathed, choking already on the thought. "It'll kill me." Blackbeard leaned in close, so near that the oil of his beard brushed Dorian's cheek. "And the girls who died from the inside out?" he asked. Dorian had no answer, only shaking hands, only tears he didn't understand how to stop. Silas didn't blink. He held the bowl steady. He remembered the cold hands of his daughter, how they stopped moving before anyone cared. He remembered Esmeralda's scream, silent, endless, when they stole her child in the dark. He remembered every man who looked away, and the one man who laughed, Dorian. Now the laughter was gone. All that remained was shame, and the teeth it had grown. He reached into the bowl with a trembling hand, as if the delay could rewrite the past. The roaches crawled up his fingers, sensing the warmth, the panic. The room watched. One man sobbed quietly near the back. Another closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, not meant for Dorian, because this was no longer punishment. This was confession through flesh. He brought one to his mouth. The room held its breath. He bit. It cracked. A leg twitched on his lip. He gagged, eyes bulging, hands shaking, but no one moved to stop him. No one stopped Blackbeard, no one ever did. Because justice, when left too long in silence, always comes back hungrier. That night, no sentence was written, no rope thrown, only a bowl. Only a man swallowing the taste of every sin he thought forgotten. Some say Dorian's soul fled Santa Clara that same night, vomiting curses into the ocean, mad with visions of insects crawling through his skin. Others say he died quietly in the harbor, begging the sea to take him. But Silas never looked for him again, and Blackbeard never needed to, because shame eats slowly, and sometimes it grows teeth. They writhed like a curse given flesh, wet, twitching, hissing softly in the bowl. Cockroaches, dozens of them, and each one carried a name. Dorian's mouth trembled, jaw locked in panic. His eyes darted from the bowl to the shadows, to the crowd of men frozen in silence. But no one moved. Not for him, not anymore. Silas Ward took a breath. Then grabbed one, fat, damp, legs scratching at his fingers, and forced it toward Dorian's mouth. Dorian thrashed, screamed, "No! Get it away from me!" But Blackbeard's men had him, one on each arm, another behind his chair, hand on his neck like a gallows tightening. "This isn't just for Emily," Silas whispered, his face hollow with something colder than rage. "It's for all of them." And with one swift motion, he shoved the insect into the traitor's mouth. Dorian gagged, body convulsing, but the roach disappeared behind clenched teeth and a scream cut off by dry heaving. His back arched, as if the very taste tore through his ribs. A sick sound followed, not a scream, not a sob. Something in between, then another and another. Each one dropped into his mouth like a curse from the grave. Each one a girl forgotten, a name never spoken, a voice drowned in silence. The tavern was dead quiet. The fire crackled. Someone near the wall began to cry, quietly, behind their hands. Dorian choked, sputtered, vomited bile and fragments of what could not be named. His eyes rolled back, his lips foamed. But still, the bowl was not empty. Silas stood firm, his hand steady, the scalpel long forgotten. Because this wasn't surgery, this was remembrance. Blackbeard watched from the shadows, not smiling, not grim, just watching, like a man who's seen this too many times in too many ports, and still feels it. Dorian's body trembled. He tried to speak, but his mouth failed him. Only a dry wheeze escaped, a noise like an apology that came too late to matter. Silas leaned in close. "Justice," he said, eyes locked on the man who had once smiled as girls disappeared, "isn't written in books. It's eaten, one bite at a time." No one dared interrupt, because everyone knew this wasn't about punishment anymore. It was transformation. That night, justice changed shape. It stopped wearing robes or carrying gavels. It grew legs, and it crawled. When the bowl was finally empty, Dorian collapsed. Not dead, not free, but ruined. Something inside him broken in a way that no one could repair, not even the sea. Silas didn't speak again. He didn't need to. He left the tavern with Blackbeard, stepping out into the damp night where no bells rang, no sailors sang, only wind and silence. Some say Dorian still lives, somewhere deep in the jungle beyond Santa Clara, chewing leaves, afraid of every shadow that moves. Others say he never left that chair, that his ghost feeds from the bowl still, hidden under the floorboards. But all who were there remember one thing, the first bite, because that's when guilt finally tasted like truth. From the cracked windows above the square, the mothers watched. Some cried in silence, faces pressed to their daughters' hair. Others clenched their jaws, dry-eyed, breathing through teeth worn down by too many nights of fear. They saw Dorian, once untouchable, once protected by gold and silence, broken, bent over a table inside the tavern, trembling, choking, surrounded by the ghosts of the living. Inside, the bowl still moved. The cockroaches hadn't slowed. Justice was still hungry. Silas stood over him, arms loose at his sides, shoulders heavy with something deeper than vengeance. He wasn't shaking, not anymore. He looked to the window, to the sky, to nowhere in particular. "And now?" he asked, voice frayed like the sails of a ship lost at sea. It wasn't a question for Dorian. It was for the town, for the walls, for the ones who stayed quiet. Blackbeard stepped forward, boots silent on the blood-warmed floor. He placed a hand on the bowl and nudged it forward, slow and deliberate. "Deep wounds," he said, "need more than a stitch." His voice was low, almost tender. The kind of voice spoken not in rage, but in understanding. The kind of voice that comes from a man who's buried more than he's saved. Dorian didn't plead anymore. His strength was gone. All that remained was tears and the clack of his teeth as they shattered against each bite. He shook violently, not from pain, but from shame, from the weight of so many eyes that had once feared him, now seeing him as he truly was, a man who fed on silence, and now he was feeding on what that silence left behind. The cockroaches crawled across the table toward his hands, his face. He didn't move. He couldn't. Then, a sound, not a scream, not a sob, a single timid clap. It came from the far corner of the tavern. An old woman wrapped in salt-stained shawls, hands like paper, eyes like stone. She clapped once more, then again. And from the windows others joined, mothers, sisters, wives, women who had buried too much and spoken too little. The sound was soft, uneven, awkward, but it grew. A rhythm made of grief and breath. Not joy, recognition. In the square, the air shifted. For the first time in years, it didn't smell like fear. It smelled like truth. Silas didn't smile. He just stood there, eyes wet, jaw clenched. He didn't need applause. He didn't want it, but he heard it, and so did Dorian. The traitor's head dropped. He wept openly, broken by something far worse than pain. Witnesses. He had always known how to hide in shadows, but now the shadows were gone, and all that remained were eyes, dozens of them, and not one would ever forget. Blackbeard turned, his coat dragging the silence behind him. He said nothing more. He didn't need to, because some justice is not shouted. It's whispered by the ones who were never heard. That night, the tavern didn't celebrate. There was no toast, no song, only the soft echo of clapping hands and the sound of a man choking on his own legacy, and above it all, the cry of the others, finally heard. Blackbeard reached into the bowl one last time. His fingers moved slowly, not with hesitation, but with reverence, like a priest before a forbidden rite. He pulled the final cockroach from the pile. Its legs kicked weakly in the air, twitching as if it knew its purpose. He held it up to the dim light, and his voice, when it came, was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a blade through cloth. This one is for her, the one who couldn't scream, the one who died in silence. Dorian didn't lift his head. The man who once commanded ships, who laughed over girls' names, who toasted to shadows, was gone. All that remained was a body that trembled, a mouth that sobbed, eyes swollen shut from shame, not fists. He didn't beg anymore. There was no point. Silas stepped forward, his coat soaked in sweat, his soul in something heavier. He knelt beside the traitor, breath shallow, heart slow, as if time itself had slowed to watch. He leaned close so that only Dorian could hear. What is never said still demands its price. And with hands no longer afraid to remember, he pressed the final insect between Dorian's lips. It twitched, fought, slid down like every unsaid truth that had ever rotted in the bellies of men who thought silence was protection. Dorian's body jerked. He gagged, dry, violent spasms that racked his chest. Then he collapsed onto the filthy floor of the tavern, convulsing in a pool of bile, spittle, and something worse, dignity lost beyond repair. The crowd didn't cheer. No one moved. Even the fire in the hearth had dimmed. Only Blackbeard remained upright, watching, not victorious, not pleased, just present, like a man who had seen this before, too many times, in too many ports, with too many names. He said nothing, just watched, like someone watching a statue crumble, not of stone, but of salt, built on cruelty, eroded by truth, shattered by silence broken. Dorian didn't die that night, but something in him did, and what rose in his place would never command a crew again, would never drink without gagging, would never forget the taste of memory forced down like poison. Silas stood, slow and tired, as if the act had aged him. Blackbeard met his eyes. No words were spoken, because some things, the worst things, live in the silence between men. And that night, the silence was finally paid for. What is never said still demands its price, and the sea, like memory, never forgets what you tried to bury. And now, Silas asked, his voice cracked open like old wood in the sun, not defiant, not proud, just hollow, the kind of hollow that comes when a man has spilled every part of himself and isn't sure what's left to carry. Blackbeard looked down at Dorian, collapsed on the tavern floor, a shell soaked in sweat, shame, and silence. It broken. His answer came soft, almost kind. Now, try to be a man again, if you still can. No one moved as Dorian crawled through the filth. The crowd parted, but no one reached to help. No one spat. No curses. No boots to the ribs. They didn't need to. The punishment had already stripped him. What remained wasn't worth hating. Outside, the square exhaled. The air, for the first time in years, didn't stink of secrets. It smelled of salt, but clean, as if the sea just this once had washed. Something away instead of leaving more behind. Silas stepped into that wind and closed his eyes. His hands hung by his sides, no longer fists, no longer shaking, just hands, human again. From between two shadows, a little girl stepped forward. Hair tangled with wind, eyes wide with something older than her years. She held out something in her tiny fingers, a cross. Crude, made of 2 branches tied with fishing twine. Silas knelt. She offered it without fear. "Thank you for scaring the monster," she said. Silas didn't answer. He just placed a hand gently on her head, not to bless, not to comfort, just to remind himself that she was real and still here. From the far edge of the crowd, a voice broke the moment. An old man, bent by time and grief, leaned on his cane, eyes never leaving the tavern door. "What if he comes back?" he murmured. Blackbeard had already mounted his horse, a dark beast with breath like smoke and hooves that sounded like distant thunder. He turned just enough to let his words roll over the square like a storm warning. "If he comes back, tell him to come hungry, because 1 bowl won't be enough next time." No one followed him. No one dared. He rode through the crowd like a shadow sliding off the edge of memory. Not a hero, not a ghost, but something older than both. Silas remained still for a long time. He looked at the cross in his hand, at the tavern door, at the window where mothers once hid, and he breathed, not freely, but finally. Some say that night marked the end of something. Others say it was only the beginning, not of vengeance but of reckoning, because monsters don't vanish, they retreat. And sometimes they remember the taste of silence. But Santa Clara would never be silent again. The waves were quiet that night, too quiet. Off the coast of Santa Clara, a small fishing boat burned, flames flickering against the dark, like the last breath of something that refused to die. No one knew whose it was, but some say it belonged to him, the one who never truly left, the one who fed the silence with fire. There was no monument, no date carved in stone, just a story whispered in the corners of salty taverns, passed from one cracked voice to another, not for glory, not for gold, but because some stories refuse to be buried. Silas Ward was never seen as a doctor again, not by the sea, not by himself. He walked with his head low and his eyes heavy, like a man carrying the weight of all the words he never said in time. They say he still kept the bowl, not as a trophy, but as a warning that silence devours more than time ever could. The little girl who gave him the wooden cross never forgot him. She would grow to tell her own children that the monster once lived in their streets, and that it wasn't claws or teeth that made him dangerous. It was how long he'd been allowed to stay. And Blackbeard. Some claim he vanished into fog that night, swallowed by a sea that owed him too much. Others say he never left, that he walks the edge of every port town, watching, listening, waiting for silence to grow dangerous again. But the old ones, the ones with barnacle hands and rum-soaked tongues, they tell it differently. He warned them, they say. We didn't listen. Now he's part of every wave that crashes in silence. In one forgotten ledger, never signed, never sealed, a line was found, scratched in salt-damaged ink. There are debts the sea never forgets, and monsters that wear the faces of men. What happened in Santa Clara wasn't written down. The ship's log from that voyage disappeared, but the men who lived through it remember, not for the horror, but for the dignity that returned, just for a moment. And in that moment, something ancient shifted. Not the wind, not the tide, the fear of being unheard, the fear of nothing changing. There was no statue, no plaque, only a silence that now spoke for itself. And if you ever hear a tap at your window on a windless night, or smell salt when the sea is far, Check your breath. Something might be clawing its way up, not from outside, but from the guilt you never named, because there are things you can't bury. You scare them away, like ghosts, like cockroaches, and if one day something cold grabs your heart and won't let go, look around. Maybe Blackbeard is near. Maybe it's your night to witness how the sea collects what can't be paid. Did you already know this forgotten part of the story? And if you had been in tavern, what would you have done? What other sea stories deserve to be told here before the tide takes them away for good? If this story touched you in any way, don't let it vanish like so many other names the sea has taken. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep hearing what was never meant to be forgotten. The book may close here, but the waves never stop whispering.